Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. This Thursday afternoon, we're going to do a Rashi from the fifth Aliyah. For some reason, when I opened the Torah website, which we usually use, I noticed that it had a truncated version of Rashi. So it's one of those times. This has happened to us before. One of those times, I'm not sure why. Maybe there are different versions of Rashi, different strands of Rashi. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's just a mistake. But I pulled up Safaria for us today, so we'll see it in a different version over here where it has the full Rashi. So in our Aliyah, the fifth Aliyah for today, we start to have the interaction between Yitzchak and Esav, and eventually with Yaakov as well. In the preceding psukim, right before this one, Parak Chavav, the end of Parak Chavav, we learn about the wives that Esav takes. We learn the fact that they're Moras Ruach. They create Moras Ruach for Yitzchak and Rivka. We think perhaps the surface Moras Ruach means a bitterness of spirit. They didn't like their daughters-in-law. I guess it's an ancient tale of mothers-in-laws and daughters-in-laws, daughters-in-law, I should say. So they didn't like them. Moras Ruach could be mar, bitter, but Rashi says Moras Ruach is actually something different, has the connotation of mamrim he'isem, of hamra'ah, of rebellion. They were rebellious of spirit. They rebelled against the spirit of the home, the spirit that Yitzchak and Rivka were trying to inculcate in their home. That's why they didn't like them. And then we come to Yitzchak and Esav, Yitzchak and Yaakov, the brachos, etc., everything that's to come in the end of the parsha. But the whole introduction to this section is the famous pasuk, Vayhi zakan Yitzchak, when Yitzchak became old, Vatichana einav miraos, his eyes became dim from seeing. He calls to his older son Esav. He says, B'ni, and he responds, Hineni, I'm here. It's a famous word, of course, Hineni. Its own connotations used many times in the story of the Akedah. Avram Avinu says Hineni. Others say Hineni. It's an important word, worth studying in and of itself. Whole interchange here is very interesting. But I want to focus on Vatichana einav meraos, that his eyes became dim from seeing. The plain meaning of the pasuk is the eyes became dim from seeing because of the first part of the pasuk, Vayhi ki zakan Yitzchak, when Yitzchak became old. So sometimes with old age comes poor eyesight. And so that seems to be the simple reading of the pasuk. In addition to that, I think Chazal saw in Vatichana einav meraos an introduction to everything that's about to come. The fact that Yitzchak calls to Esav, the fact that Yitzchak wants to bless Esav, the fact that Yitzchak loves Esav, all of what's to come in this story is prefaced by Vayhi ki zakan Yitzchak vatichana einav meraos, because he's old and he can't see, and therefore he's willing to go down this route of giving Esav all of these brachos as opposed to Yaakov, because were he to be able to see clearly, were he be able to see the situation in front of him with utter clarity, he never would have done this. That's the assumption that Chazal make, the assumption the Mefarshim make, that these words of introduction are really the heading of the entire story. Because Kizakan Yitzchak Vatichana einav meraos, everything else transpires. Now the only question is why Tichena einav meraos? Why were his eyes dim from seeing? So again, the simple reading is because he's old. But Rashi gives three possibilities of why his eyes became dim, why he becomes blinded to the reality in front of him. Vatichena, so the first option is Ba'ashanan shel elu, with the smoke of those. Now you have to look at the Rashi before, the pasuk before. It's talking about the wives of Esav bringing in idolatry into the home. The smoke of the sacrifices of idolatry blinded Yitzchak to what he was seeing. That's one possibility. Davar acher, another possibility is Kshenekad al gabe hamizbeach, when Yitzchak was tied to the mizbeach during the Akedah, V'haya aviv rotzeh l'shachto, and his father was going to slaughter him at the behest of God. At that moment, the heavens opened up. The angels looked down from the heavens. They saw their precious Yitzchak bound up upon the Mizbeach, and they started to cry. Their tears fell down. They fell into the eyes of Yitzchak, who was on the Mizbeach, staring up at the heavens. And therefore he was blinded. His eyes became dim from the tears of the angels. Thirdly, maybe this had nothing to do with old age. Maybe it had nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. Maybe it had nothing to do with the Akedah, but it was a miracle. God caused Yitzchak's eyes to become dim. not so that he would give all of this to Esau, which he was going to do anyways, but actually to introduce the later part of the story in which Yaakov is able to steal back the brachos, specifically because his father couldn't see. That's why he dresses up as Esau. He comes to his father. None of that would have been possible had his father been able to see. And therefore, this was a deliberate move by Hashem to enable Yaakov to get the brachos. A lot of different ideas here, interesting interpretations. This could be a shir in and of itself, but I just want to show you one thing which I've been thinking about in this Rashi. The three options here really speak to different ideas about what's going on here in the story. It could be that if this is an introduction to the blindness of Yitzchak, to why he was not able to do what was right in the eyes of us, in the eyes of Hashem, by giving the brachos to Yaakov, it could be that it was because of the negative influences in his home. That's possible. Or it could be because of the tears of the angels at the Akedah. Or it could be something miraculous that happened beyond his control. A and C, I understand. Miraculous, beyond your control. Okay, God decides this is the way it has to be in the story. Fine. Ashanan shel Elu, the negative influences in the home, either physically affected his eyes or metaphorically, metaphysically, affected his judgment. He became influenced by his surroundings. Also reasonable. You could argue, how could Yitzchak become influenced? What? Okay, fine. That's a reasonable approach. It's the middle one I don't understand. It's a beautiful story, but the angels crying and their tears coming into his eyes. But what does that have to do with this story? And why would their tears blind Yitzchak? I don't understand. What? The fact that Ashanan Shel Elu could blind him in the physical world, I understand it. In the metaphysical world, I understand it. But in terms of the physical part or the metaphysical part, I don't understand what the tears of the angels could do to affect the sight of Yitzchak. In a physical plane, why do tears blind him? In a metaphysical plane, a metaphorical plane, why would tears that blind him from the angels cause him now not to see what was going on in front of him? So I want to take one stab at this, but there could be many other answers, and I'll leave it you to think about it further. Perhaps what it's saying here is, in the experience of the Akedah, there was a union between heaven and earth. There was a fusion between heaven and earth. When the angels look down at Yitzchak and their tears fall, that tear that falls is the connection between heaven and earth. It could be that Yitzchak was elevated so much in that experience of the Akedah that he became an otherworldly person. He became a person who didn't really live in the realities of this world. And when a person doesn't live in the realities of this world, they see a very idealized form of people and behaviors. They don't see the reality in front of them. So it could be that truly, because he became angel-like, he was not able to see the flaws in Esau, his son, in front of him, and was willing to go forward with this plan. If understood in that way, we understand how all three versions of Rashi, and even the Pshat interpretation that we suggested in the Pasuk, because of old age, come to bear on why Yitzchak couldn't see, not just physically couldn't see, but metaphorically couldn't see the reality in front of him in this story here. But I leave it to you to think about other ideas and interpretations of that middle piece of Rashi over here, which I think is quite perplexing. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
a good
you.
one. See you tomorrow. Be well.